Good evening from the ASC studios in downtown Lafayette, Louisiana. This is Current Issues, and I'm your host, Hesham Tillawi. Welcome to the program, ladies and gentlemen. Tonight, busy program again. We will be having lots to talk about. In the first hour, we will have the honor of having the Honorable Paul Craig Roberts, who was the Assistant Secretary of the Treasury during the Reagan administration. And he has been credited for a lot of the the Reaganism that we have, or Reaganomics actually, that was going on at that time. Probably a lot of you don't even know what I'm talking about. You probably need to be old enough to know what Reaganomics is. And also in the second hour, we will have investigative reporter Christopher Bolan with the American Free Press. Before we go to our honorable guest, there's a couple of things in the news that we will be talking about in the second hour. I just want to kind of give you the heads up on them. We will be talking about the Israeli attack on the Palestinian prison. You probably have seen a lot of things going on in the Middle East. And unfortunately, you did not see the attack on the Palestinian prison that took place a couple of days ago. Also, the Alabama church burning. We've told you about it last week, that 3 college kids were arrested. We will be talking about that. We have more news for you on that. And also, there's a couple of things that we do need to talk about. And basically, we have said this before, who controls the media? Probably a lot of you never heard of Dale Crowley Jr. or Crowley Jr., but I think it's Crowley. He is a radio talk show host in the Washington, D.C. area. And Dale has been on the air for about 20 years now. He's an evangelist Christian. And he happened to mention something about Israel last week. Now, after 20 years, the station manager, because he criticized Israel, he did not criticize Israel for what they're doing to the Muslims. He criticized Israel for what they're doing to the Christian and how they are destroying some of these Christian churches. But he was dismissed because he criticized Israel. Also, probably some of you have heard about Jay Benish, the teacher, who had one of his students had recorded him. Also, again, this was a social studies course. And what he had mentioned, so this little kid, he taped him, and we're going to talk about this. We'll tell you a lot more of why he was taped and the danger of this sort of tactics, this police tactics that some in the media are using. And we will also, amongst other stuff, we will speak. That's what you're seeing now is the student who had taped his teacher. We'll touch on that in the next hour. So in the next hour, we have a lot to talk about. And of course, Christopher Bolan, investigative reporter with the American Free Press, he has a lot to say about a lot of things. But let me introduce my guest for the first hour. He is the Honorable Paul Craig Roberts, is the John M. Olin Fellow at the Institute for Political Economy, Senior Research Fellow at the Hoover Institution, Stanford University, and Research Fellow at the Independent Institute. A former editor and columnist for the Wall Street Journal and columnist for Business Week and the Scripps Howard News Service. He is nationally syndicated columnist for Creators Syndicate in Los Angeles and columnist for Investors Business Daily. In 1992, he received the Warren Brooks Award for Excellence in Journalism. In 1993, the Forbes Media Guide ranked him as one of the top 7 journalists. He was Distinguished Fellow at the Cato Institute from 1993 to 1996. From 1982 through 1993, he held the William E. Simon Chair in Political Economy at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. During 1981 to 1982, he served as Assistant Secretary of Treasury for Economic Policy. President Reagan and Treasury Secretary Reagan credited him with a major role in the economic recovery tax of 1981. And he was awarded the Treasury Department Meritorious Service Award for his outstanding contributions to the formulation of the United States economy economic policy. From 1975 to 1978, Dr. Roberts served on the congressional staff where he drafted the Kemp-Roth bill and played a leading role in developing bipartisan support for supply-side economic policy. Dr. Roberts' latest book is The Tyranny of Good Intentions, co-authored with IPE fellow Lawrence Stratton and published by Prima Publishing in May 2000. Dr. Roberts also has held numerous academic appointments. Among other things, that's probably going to take me another 15 minutes to read the accomplishments of our guest. Without any further ado, I'd like to go directly to Dr. Roberts. Good evening, sir. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, can you hear me?
Great, yes. Yes,
right.
Thank you. Thanks for joining us, sir. I appreciate it. Dr. Roberts, I would like to start, we're going to talk a lot about politics, but I'd like to start with the with economy first, because I guess both subjects are related. You can't really separate the two because they are interlocked and interrelated. I know you don't like very much the globalization and outsourcing. And before we go deeply into this, I've read some of your articles, and you're saying that globalization is not good for America. Can you tell us why you think that?
Yes. What globalization permits is the substitution of foreign labor for American labor in the production of goods and services for the American market. Globalization essentially lets the corporations dump their American employees and replace them with foreign employees, either from job offshoring or from bringing foreign employees in on work visas, such as the H-1B visa, the L-1 visa. So that you end up with the dismantling of the ladders of upward mobility in American society and a polarization between rich and poor. This, of course, is a recipe for political instability and social strife.
Okay. So, I mean, what is wrong with... I mean, we live in a free enterprise system. What is wrong with companies if they can make the same product, let's say in India, for half or less than half what it costs them to do it here? What is wrong with that?
Well, I just told you what is wrong. It means the impoverishment of the American labor force.
But I mean, is that the responsibility of companies, though?
If they're American companies.
Okay, so you are taking it a step beyond just profit.
No, listen, the case for free trade is very specific, and the case for free trade is based on mutual benefit. It's an argument that free trade permits each country in the trading partnership to specialize in those fields where it is most productive and to trade with the other countries for the other products. But that is not what globalization is. What globalization is the desertion of a high-wage country by that country's capital and technology to a low-wage country, where the same capital and technology now employs labor at a fraction of the labor costs and makes products to send back to its home market. This bears no relationship to any case ever made for free trade. And it's certainly true that if a country wants to destroy itself, it can do that. But that's what happens. It is self-destruction for the United States to participate in globalization, which is a form of labor arbitrage, substitution of foreign labor for American labor.
Okay. Now, I thought when what we trade with China was like whatever they make, little toys and, like shirts and T-shirts, but you're saying that we actually trade with China where we also buy from them high-tech equipment, and it's not just like little Walmart items?
No, well, it's not that we don't even buy from them, and we're not trading with them. What is happening is that the American firms create their factories there. They take the capital and technology there, they locate it there, they employ Chinese labor and make their products in China, and the American firms then send the products back over here to be sold. It's not trade, it's labor arbitrage in which American firms make the products with Chinese labor that they sell to Americans. That is not trade. We are not trading with China. We are locating our factories in China and producing there with Chinese labor, and we bring the things back here to sell to Americans. Now, this can work only in the short run until enough of the Americans have been displaced from the higher-paying jobs and have been forced either off into unemployment or underemployment into lower-paying jobs, and the consumer market gradually dies in the United States.
Okay. Now, you wrote an article, the title of that article, Who Owns the Dollar, and that's when you were talking about China. And are we borrowing money from China?
Oh, yes. We borrow tremendous amounts of money. They're probably our most active banker. Japanese, I think, is still the largest banker. But without the Chinese and the Japanese, and to some extent the South Koreans, we wouldn't be able to operate because they finance the United States budget deficit and they finance our trade deficit. So, in effect, the so-called American superpower is not a superpower. We're totally in the hands of our Asian bankers, and any one of them could destroy the United States in a matter of minutes just by dumping their holdings of dollar assets.
Now, Dr. Roberts, when you say we borrowing money, I mean, is it like we go to a bank and borrow money, so the United States is borrowing like actual money?
We borrow money in the following ways. One, when we run a $400 billion budget deficit, as the federal government is doing at this present time, the government has to find the source. When it's $400 billion in the red, it has to find the source of money from somewhere. In days long ago, Americans would buy the bonds as part of their investments or their retirement plans, but the American savings rate now is negative. And so the money is lent by foreigners who have surplus dollars from their trade relationships with the United States. For example, both Japan and China have very large trade surpluses with the United States, and Japan has had one for many, many years, 20 years, longer perhaps. And so they have these large accumulations that they use to purchase our debt. Now, why do they do it? They do it for a variety of reasons. One of the reasons the Japanese do it is to stop the Japanese yen from rising rapidly against the dollar. They like to keep the yen from rising too much, though it has risen tremendously over the years, but they try to slow it down, let it be incremental so that it doesn't interfere with their penetration in our markets. They want to be able to sell their cars and the other products. The Chinese do it because they have pegged their currency to the dollar, and it's easy to maintain the peg if they support the dollar. So those are reasons that they lend us this money, it serves their interests. But at some point, they won't need to serve their interests in that way. And then we will be vulnerable should they decide not to continue lending. Unless, of course, we take some actions to put our own house in order.
Okay. Now, on about 30 different occasions, you were involved in congressional hearings, and one of them was on the United States-China Economic and Security Review. And what you said in your statement, and I quote, is, what we are witnessing in part is the loss of a sense of national identity. Many things have brought about this loss of identity: open borders, massive immigration of third world peoples, attack on American identity by cultural Marxists and post-modernists. Many things are eroding a sense of cohesiveness. A Tower of Babel is not a country. Right. Can you, just in simple English, what exactly you're saying in there?
Well, I'm saying that the American elite are not patriotic. They have very short-term personal economic interests. Those interests do not relate to the long-run interests of the country. They're totally unlike the leadership in Japan, for example, or the leadership in China, which is forward-looking and is thinking about what will be the position of China in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. The Japanese have been highly successful with this long-run viewpoint, and they think of themselves as Japanese. They think of themselves as Chinese. The American elites think of themselves as some sort of global person with global interests that are separate from and independent of the interests of the United States. And therefore, there is no one saying, where will the United States be in 10 years? Where will it be in 20 years? Where will it be in 30 years?
Okay. Now, who do you mean, who are you talking about when you say attacks on American identity by cultural Marxists? What are you talking about there?
Cultural Marxists are probably one of the most dominant intellectual elements in American universities, and they have been very effective in undermining a sense of American cohesiveness. They are very effective at discrediting the kinds of values or accomplishments or historical record that give meaning to a country. If you'd like to put it this way, they unmask the myths and leave in its place denunciations and a record of crimes. And so this tends to erode the kind of self-belief or belief in the country, and you see the strongest reaction to the cultural Marxist is the neoconservatives, who basically were able to take over the former conservative movement and take over the Republican Party by representing themselves as the opposition to the cultural Marxist.
Now, I mean, are you using cultural Marxist for, I guess, lack of a better word, or are you referring to a particular group here, or just in general?
It's a very well-known term used quite a lot. There's a tremendous amount of scholarly writings about it, and they are an intellectual force, and have been for many decades.
And you're saying that's what neoconservatism came about? Is that that's
neoconservatives were able to assume a leadership role in the Republican Party by presenting themselves as the opponents of the cultural Marxist. And as far as I'm concerned, both movements are inimical to the United States. Both movements stand outside our traditions. And it's a very sorry state of affairs when the two most influential intellectual movements in the United States both are from outside our tradition.
Okay. Now, I want to go into a different area here, which is, very much related, but it's a different topic, which is the media. And you did say that much of the problem is the media itself, which serves as a disinformation agency for the Bush administration. Fox News and right-wing talk radio are the worst, but with propagandistic outlets setting the standards for truth and patriotism, all of the media is affected to some degree. Are you saying that the media, Fox News, right-wing, which is probably most people get their news from, are you saying they're nothing but a propaganda arm for the Bush administration?
Yes, that's exactly what I'm saying of Fox News. It is nothing but a propaganda arm for the Bush administration.
So, I mean, Hitler had the propaganda ministry. Bush's ministry is the mainstream media?
Yes, Bush doesn't need
propaganda.
Bush doesn't need a propaganda ministry. It works that way for him, and for a variety of reasons. One is that during the 1990s, the federal government broke with its past tradition and permitted a tremendous amount of media concentration, so that about 4 or 5 mega firms now own the entirety of what you call the mainstream media in the United States. And most of the value of these large conglomerates are the broadcast licenses, the radio and TV broadcast licenses, which they hold at the mercy of the government, and so they are not interested to annoy the government and risk these large accumulations of broadcast licenses. The other reason is that now that the media is so highly concentrated, it's just a corporate enterprise. It's run with a view not to news like in the old days, but it's run to the view of the bottom line. And that is determined by advertising revenues. And so they are very careful not to be controversial or to do anything that could lead to boycotts, protests, or anything that would damage their advertising revenues. So the media walks hand in hand with whatever the conventional wisdom is. Whatever the line that comes from the government is the line you hear from the media.
Okay. Now, you have also written about 9/11, and you said when I saw the neoconservative response to 9/11 was to turn a war against stateless terrorism into military attacks on Muslim states, I realized that the Bush administration was committing a strategic blunder with open-ended disastrous consequences for the United States that in the end would destroy Bush, the Republican Party, and the conservative movement. Now, what would you have done differently in response to 9/11, Dr. Roberts?
If I believed the government's line that it was done by a terrorist group called Al-Qaeda, if I did believe that, and I was in charge of the government, then I would focus on Al-Qaeda. I would have started by saying, how in the world did some guy in a cave over in Afghanistan manage to penetrate our defenses despite all of our intelligence collection and satellite spying and everything else, and attack the buildings? And I would first try to see what failure the government here had committed to let some guy in a cave in Afghanistan plan such a fantastic thing. And I would correct that. And then I would focus on seeing if there's some way to maybe track this person down and capture them and put them on trial. I would not have gone and invaded two countries which had nothing whatsoever to do with it. I would have not have used 9/11 as an excuse for some other agenda, totally unrelated to the 9/11 attack.
So why did the government, and you being on the inside of one administration, one Republican administration, why did the government invade Iraq then? And if Reagan was in power, would he have invaded Iraq?
Of course not. Of course he wouldn't have. And none of us know why we invaded Iraq. The reasons we've been given, we now know all were false.
So who's running our country, Dr. Roberts?
Sorry?
Who is running the country then?
That's a very good question. Who's running the country? I think that fear and hysteria are helping people run the country who should not be running it. But I couldn't answer that question, and I don't think anyone can answer why, the real reason we invaded Iraq, because it has now been proven beyond all doubt that we knew, that the United States government knew that there weren't any weapons of mass destruction, that this was an orchestrated excuse. They obviously knew that Saddam Hussein, a secularist who oppressed Islamic mullahs, was not allied with the Islamic Al-Qaeda. These things were, of course, known, and we have the leaked top-secret memos from the British cabinet in which the head of British intelligence says that the Americans first made up their mind to attack Iraq and then looked around for a reason. Well, why did they do it? We don't know. A lot of people give different reasons based on their own speculation. They'll say, oh, they did it for the oil. They did it for Israel. They have all kinds of
maybe a combination of all of the above?
But the president is the only one who knows why he did it, and he hasn't told us yet. The things he's told us, we know, are not true.
Okay. Now, let me ask you something. I don't know if you are privileged to this type of information or not. How great would you think the opposition within the higher echelons and the technocrats within the government systems, like, the heads of departments and the technocrats who are basically running the day-to-day operation of the government, how great is the opposition to what the neocons are doing?
I think it has to be extremely high. Very high, and this is why I've been very puzzled. When I was in the government, it would have been impossible for the government to effectively go against the State Department staff. You would have to convince them, carry them with you in your arguments. And yet this government has been able to run over the professional bureaucracy, to ignore it. We've now had several high-ranking CIA officials who are no longer in the agency say that the government was not interested whatsoever in their intelligence, that they were being pressed to make up intelligence that fit what the White House wanted to do. So this is the first time in my life, certainly when I was in the government a quarter of a century ago, you couldn't run over the bureaucracy, but they have run over the bureaucracy, and the people who have blown the whistle on them have been fired and removed and got rid of. And this is across a wide variety of fields, and includes also the person in charge of government contracts. And when this woman said that these contracts are not being bid properly, they're being assigned and given to favorites, and this is against the rules, so they fired her. And the Congress has not done investigations. It's not stood up for the civil servants who have blown the whistle, whether it's on the misuse of intelligence or it's on the illegal award of contracts or any other subject. So I don't know how that has happened or how they have managed to get away with it. I think that what lets them get away with all of these things is 9/11. Americans believe the government line that they were attacked, being an innocent, upright country, and we were ruthlessly attacked, and that we're going to be attacked again and again, and there's going to be a nuclear weapon set off in American cities, and so on and so on. And the people are angry about that. They're fearful. Some are hysterical. And this, I think, is the cover that lets the Bush administration evade the law and do pretty much whatever it wants, as if it were a dictatorship.
Okay. We are going to go to the phones. We have people jamming up the lines, and they've been on hold for probably 45 minutes. So let's go to Tony on line one. Go ahead, Tony.
Yes, thank you for taking my call.
Sure.
Let me see if I can ask these questions very simply, because I'm fascinated by your guest. Recently, I posed to our local state representative, Charles Bustani, that companies were wrongfully leaving the country for labor arbitrage, as you described it. He categorically denied that and said that they were leaving because of federal regulation. So I'd like you to comment on that point by the local representative. Secondly, in recent senatorial testimony, as I understood it, questions were posed to the head of Chevron Texaco. And the questions were that something to the effect that 40% of the production in the United States is domestic, and it's produced at approximately $12 a barrel. Foreign production, of course, is produced at a higher rate. And what was proposed was why doesn't the price at the pump reflect the fact that 40% of the oil is produced at a lower rate? Then the third question is, can you comment on the reasonableness or effectiveness of this project for a new American century, which I think is part of this neocon concept that you've described. I'll listen to I'll take the answer off the air because I want to hear what you have.
All right, thank you, Tony.
All right, the answer to the first question is that the state legislative person doesn't know what he's talking about. It is true that regulatory costs in the United States are high, but they're no higher than they've been for some time. And as high as they are, they do not count for much compared to being able to hire labor at, say, 1/20th or 1/25th the cost. This is a far greater incentive and something that shows up directly in profits and share values and performance bonuses for the CEOs. The reason outsourcing has occurred is for there are two reasons. It's a new phenomenon, offshore outsourcing. It required the collapse of world socialism, which happened when the Soviet Union collapsed. When the Soviet Union left the scene in 1990, this caused the two large Asian socialist countries, China and India, to reconsider, and they did, and they opened themselves to Western capital. And this is the first time in history that Western capital had access to the massive labor supplies in India and China. And the reason these labor supplies are attractive is that if those people work with American capital and American technology, they're just as productive as Americans. Because what makes labor productive is the capital and technology with which it works. So if a Chinese person is working with American capital and technology, he's just as productive as a guy in the United States, but he can be hired at a tiny fraction of the wage. And he can be hired for this tiny fraction because in China and India, they have vast, underutilized pools of labor. The overhang on the labor market in China, for example, is equal to the entire population of the United States. So when you have a huge excess supply of labor, it keeps the wages down. It'll be decades before that labor is pulled into the workforce and wages get bid up. So that's the first answer. The next question you asked was about oil. The value of oil does not depend on the cost at which it can be produced in different locations. It depends on the total supply in the market and the total demand. And so the price could be many multiples of the cost depending on the demand. And the third question is, the Project for a New American Century is a paper prepared by the neoconservatives some years ago, and it lays out the American invasion of the Middle East, and it justifies it partly in terms of Israel's interests. I can't remember if this particular paper, which I've read, was the neoconservative paper that was done in conjunction with the Likud party in Israel. But there are neoconservative papers along the same lines that were done for the Likud party in Israel. They have very close relations. So that's I think I've answered the three questions.
Okay. Yes, you have. We're going to go to line 2 with Brad. Go ahead, Brad.
Hello, Mr. Tillawi?
Yes, go ahead.
Yeah. Thank you. Sir, Mr. Roberts, I'd like to ask you, if our money is really based on nothing, it's not based on gold or anything like that, what's to stop us from just telling, like, let's say the Japanese, that today a dollar's worth, 5,000, what is it they use over there?
Yen.
Yen, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
5,000 yen, or if the Chinese, what would make them, if our money's not based on anything, and how come we can hire these people if, like I say, if they're only agreeing that our money's worth what it is? They're not, you can't prove our money's worth what it is. It's just an agreement, isn't it?
Well, no one can.
You know what I mean? I mean, if our money is not based on anything, how come we can dictate? Can't we dictate what it's worth? And can't we say, "Hey, Chinese,
well, we can't.
They are
we can't
dollars
dictate
worth 50,000
what it's worth.
yours is, so therefore our debt's almost wiped out." Are you guys following me? Or
Yes. Go ahead, Doctor.
Okay, thank you.
We cannot dictate what it's worth. The market dictates what it's worth. There are huge supplies of dollars in international currency markets, and the market determines what it's worth, and it has gone down dramatically over the last 30, 40 years. It's been just a dramatic drop in the exchange value of the dollar. The only reason the dollar still has value is that it has the role of reserve currency. It inherited that role when the British lost it. And the dollar has been the world's reserve currency certainly since the end of the Second World War, and in some sense since the end of the First World War. So if you're the reserve currency, it means that essentially international exchange, international trade, is settled in your currency. Things are bills. Everyone knows about the oil is billed in dollars, but everything is. And it's convenient to have a reserve currency. I remember studying years ago about this massive inflation in China, and long ago, they had paper money. And despite the massive inflation, everyone continued to use the rapidly depreciating money because the cost of barter was so high. To find somebody that had what you wanted and who wanted what you had, that you could trade the goods or the services, was very difficult. So people stuck with the rapidly depreciating paper currency. So people in the world today are sticking with the dollar because there's huge benefits from having a reserve currency, and there's no obvious substitute at this time. The Japanese and Chinese do not want the role as reserve currency because it interferes with their domestic management of economic policy. It looked like the euro might be rising to displace the dollar, but it fell into difficulties when the French and the Dutch voted down the European Union. I think that was last year. And so that made that currency less certain. And there's not one. And so people are using the dollar because it's better to have one than not to have one.
So, Doctor, you think if the euro overtakes the dollar, do you see that? I mean, do you foresee that in the near future? And what will happen when that takes place?
I had thought that it might take the place, but the political uncertainties that have resulted in Europe because of the dissatisfaction with national sovereignties disappearing into some European superstate which doesn't really have any tradition or anything behind it. I'm not sure that the euro will be able to take the role. And also, Europe is beginning to suffer the same kind of problems of the United States because they are high wage and their capital and technology is just as mobile as America. And so you will see increasingly offshoring, the outsourcing of jobs, and this weakens economies. So where would a new reserve currency come from? And you would think it would come from the rising economic powers. In my opinion, those are China and India. It'll be some time, and it may actually transpire that the dollar will collapse and lose the role, and no other currency will rise to take it. And then that would make international trade problematic and more difficult. So one can't always assume that there will be an effective reserve currency to serve purposes of trade.
Okay. All right, let's go to line 3 with Ray. Go ahead, Ray.
Thank you very much,
You're
Doctor.
welcome.
This is a wonderful opportunity for a little clarification officially. Which Treasury are you speaking of, Doctor? Are you speaking of the United States Treasury or the Federal Alcohol Administration Treasury?
This is the United States Treasury.
Well, I'm asking the doctor.
Yes. Well,
do you agree, sir, that there are two departments of the Treasury?
There is the United States Treasury, and it has many branches, many agencies within it. Yes.
Do you recognize the Federal Alcohol Administration Treasury? For example, in 1998, the United States Court of Appeals for the First Circuit identified as Second Secretary of the Treasury, which has connections with the Internal Revenue Service. So here's my question. Is the Internal Revenue Service officially an organization of the United States Department of the Treasury? Yes or no?
Yes, it is, yes. It certainly was when I was there. The commissioner reports to the Secretary of the Treasury and was always present in our morning staff meetings.
Well, I'm certainly not arguing with you, but the United States Department of the Treasury was organized by statutes codified in Title 31 U.S.C. The only mention anywhere in the IRS in 31 U.S.C. Section 301.310 is the authorization for the President to appoint an Assistant General Counsel to the U.S. Department of the Treasury. That's the only mention anywhere in there. So this was my question. And the last question, can the Internal Revenue Service legally show Department of Treasury and all of their outgoing letters?
The Internal Revenue Service
Thank you, Ray.
is answerable to the reports to the Secretary of the Treasury. And, of course, being as it's the agency that raises the non-borrowed money that the government spends, it has tremendous powers. And Congress makes sure that it has tremendous powers so that it can raise the revenues without meeting a lot of resistance. But it's certainly probably the most valued agency in the government because it provides the money that they spend.
Okay. Let's go to line 1 with Ramsey. Go ahead, Ramsey. Ramsey, you're on.
Yes, hello, sir. How are you?
Yes, go ahead.
Yes, sir. I just have a question for Dr. Roberts.
Sure.
Do you think, sir, about the port deal that happened last week, 10 days ago, like UAE purchasing the business in the terminals?
Yeah, the P&O.
Yeah, and sir, about you, sir, he mentioned about the new conservative plan. You see, that plan was called a clean break, a new strategy for securing the realm. That was done by Richard Pearl.
Okay.
Yes, that was one of them.
In the early 80s.
Right.
The new conservative plan.
Okay.
There's more than one. That was one of them, yes. Did he ask me about the port deal?
Yeah. His first question was, what do you think about the port deal?
Yeah. Well, I think that the port deal failed precisely because President Bush has been so effective in his propaganda about Arab terrorism. And he has convinced everyone, particularly his supporters and the Republicans in the Congress, that we face grave dangers from Arabs who are terrorists and hate us for our freedom and democracy, as the President has said on many occasions. And since he has convinced his supporters and the Republicans that this is the case, they were dumbfounded when they learned that the President had made a deal to turn the ports over to Arabs. And Homeland Security was dumbfounded. And the police commissioners in all the port cities, such as New York, were dumbfounded. And they all said no one told us, no one asked us, how can this be? And that's why Bush had to get the agreement withdrawn.
Okay.
You can't convince people that they're under threat and then propose to turn parts of Homeland Security over to those people that you have told Americans are a threat.
Okay. And his second question was about the clean break for Israel.
That is a neoconservative paper. There are several of them. A previous caller mentioned another one of the papers, and both of the papers essentially are saying the same thing. And you can get these online. And probably a good idea for Americans to read them so that they can see the very aggressive attitude that these papers, these neoconservatives reflect. They really believe that the United States has a monopoly on virtue and righteousness. And they really believe that the United States has the right and even the obligation to force the rest of the world to do as we say, or to copy our way of life. These arguments come out very strongly in these papers, and it's why scholars call the neoconservatives Jacobins, and they are speaking of the Jacobins of the French Revolution. You may remember the American Revolution. When the British departed, we settled down and we cultivated our own garden. We didn't want foreign entitlements. We weren't going to bother anyone else. And the French Revolution, which came 10 years later, their view is totally different. They said, we are going to impose the French Revolution on all of Europe. And so the war started that lasted on for a quarter of a century. It became known as Napoleonic Wars. Well, that's the attitude of neoconservatives. They don't have George Washington's attitude. They have...
Dr. Robert, why is it, I mean, I've seen a lot of the names with the neoconservative movement, and most of the leaders happen to, I don't know if it's by design or just by chance, most of them happen to prescribe to the Jewish faith. Is conservatism, is it a Jewish movement?
It's broader than that, but you're right that the leaders, most of the leaders, are Jewish, and the people who hold high office in the Bush administration, who are neoconservatives, with the sole exception, I think, of John Bolton, who's now at the United Nations. They're Jewish, and scholars who have studied them and traced their origin say they come partly out of a philosopher at the University of Chicago named Strauss, and they come partly out of the left-wing communists from the Trotsky.
Dr. Roberts, we are running out of time, and I only have time to say thank you, sir, for being with us tonight. It has been a pleasure having you on the program.
Yes, well, thank you for sharing your audience with me.
Good night, sir. Thank you. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, we only have 10 seconds to say. I'm sorry we did not get, I know there's a lot of people holding. We did not get to you. We apologize. We'll be back in 5 minutes with Christopher Bollin. It will be an exciting next hour. See you then.